Hello and welcome to Moneycontrol. Tata Steel announced its financial results for the first quarter of FY24 last evening. By now, you must have looked at the numbers. But we are here to discuss what's behind those numbers and what's the way ahead. Joining us today is MD and CEO of Tata Steel, Mr. TV Narendran. Mr. Narendran, welcome to Moneycontrol.
Thank you, Rachita, for having me on the show.
Very good to have you on the show, and congratulations. Your board has approved your reappointment for another term. So clearly lots going on and you will be busy for the next few quarters as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot to do for sure.
Absolutely. Mr. Narendran, help me understand. I mean, we have looked at the numbers. Your profits went down some 93%. But what is interesting is that ahead of the results, a lot of brokerages had expected that you may actually report a loss in this quarter given the environment. What has happened there? Of course, I think one of the surprises was the realization improving. So help me understand what went behind these numbers in the quarter.
Yeah, so I think the expectations were that we will have a loss, also because we had guided that we will be completing the transaction on the British pension scheme, and we'll have to recognize some losses on that account, or rather, at least some book losses. So that's where the analysts had assumed that we will be negative, but I think we had some one-offs positive as well. Plus, the performance, particularly in India, has been reasonably good despite the challenging environment. So we've been even after you take out the one-offs, you've delivered a better number than most people had expected. The volumes have been strong in India. Internationally, the prices have been weak. That is reflected in the pricing in India as well. In Europe, we've had some challenges, which also we had guided because we had said that the blast furnace in Netherlands was down for relining, which means that we were down with one blast furnace out of two in Netherlands for 6 months. So we had given those guidances. That's why the analysts had done their numbers. Of course, we did better than that. And we are significantly lower than last year because last year Q1 was a period when steel prices were quite high and coal prices were not yet that high in the sense that the coal that we were consuming was still not a high cost coal. So this was the quarter when the export duty was brought in India. So comparing to Q1 of last year, I think may not be a good comparison because there were some abnormal circumstances in Q1 of last year.
Fair point. And Mr. Narendran, when we are looking at your Europe operations, it's probably the third consecutive quarter where you have posted losses there. Help us understand, because on one hand, like you rightly said, that you have the relining of furnaces happening in the Netherlands, and on the other hand, there are these macro factors which are affecting the business. Of course, price moderation has been quite steep in this quarter. So help me understand what's the way ahead. How is the rest of the year going to pan out for your Europe operations?
Sure. Rachita, normally we give our European numbers on a consolidated basis. But inside that, if you look at our performance for the last 8-10 years or more, typically the Netherlands business is cash positive, EBITDA positive, PAT positive. So it's a pretty strong business. UK is where we've struggled typically because structurally there are some challenges in the UK. The assets are old and coming to end of life, etc. So oftentimes the Netherlands business offsets the losses in the UK business on a consolidated basis. You tend to see a positive EBITDA more often than not. That's generally what happens in Europe. But last year, because of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, the gas prices and electricity prices in Europe shot up very significantly in a short period of time. Secondly, you had the demand recovery, taking time because again there was the overhang of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So it was a pretty tough year in Europe. And then on top of that, last two quarters, or rather Q1 and Q2 of this year, we have the blast furnace relining. So the Netherlands business has not been able to contribute on a consolidated basis to the European numbers. In fact, the Netherlands business has had negative EBITDA in Q1, which is very unusual. So that's why you see, or the last two quarters, the Netherlands business has had a negative EBITDA. So that's why you see 3 quarters in a row, Europe having negative EBITDA. The challenge will continue for Q2 as well because the blast furnace is still being relined. It's a 5 to 6 month process. So we will see the positive recovery in the performance of Netherlands only from Q3. And then, of course, by Q4, Netherlands will be back to normal. So that's the kind of timeline or the kind of view forward. UK business, obviously, when steel prices are good, tends to make money. When steel prices are not so good, they tend to be on a negative EBITDA basis. So I think that's always been the challenge with the UK business. Over the years, we've shrunk the UK business from 10 million tons to 3 million tons, and the India business has grown to 20 million tons. So UK at one time was 40% of our business. Today it is 10% of our business. So that's why Tata Steel on a consolidated basis is on a much stronger place. Going forward, Netherlands business will come back to normal, which is positive EBITDA, positive cash, positive PAT. UK will swing between positive and negative EBITDA. Hopefully, will be more than offset by the Netherlands business.
Fair enough. You've given me a big picture here, and since you do report your numbers on a consolidated basis, help me understand what is your outlook for price, demand, and realization for the second quarter and the rest of the year.
So as far as demand is concerned, I think India, the demand continues to be okay, driven by the fact that the auto industry has been strong. Construction demand in Q2 will tend to be a bit soft because during the monsoon season, the construction activity slows down. But overall, the India story, as far as demand is concerned, is quite strong, and which is reflected in the fact that we are pretty much running at 100% capacity utilization and selling 95% of that in India. Globally, the demand is going to be driven a lot by what happens in China. The recovery in China has been not as great as expected. The stimulus that has been given so far, which has gone to the real estate sector, is more spent on completing projects than starting new projects. Though I see that in the last couple of days, there's a little bit more excitement about more stimulus coming to the real estate sector in China. So a lot of the global demand will depend a lot on what's happening in China. Europe will slowly recover. Next year will be better than this year from a macroeconomic point of view. In Europe and in US, as you know, inflation is still on the higher side. The Fed, the European Central Bank, the UK Central Bank, all are talking of having some more rate hikes. So I think it'll be next year before you really see economic activity come back strongly in Europe. But we are positive about India, and that's where most of our growth is going to come from. As far as prices are concerned, we've guided that Q2 realizations in both Europe and India will be lower than Q1. In India, it'll be about 3,100 rupees per ton lower in Q2 than Q1. In Europe, we are expecting it to be about 38 pounds per ton lower in Q2 than Q1. But at the same time, 38 euros. And while at the same time, we expect the costs, the coking coal consumption cost, to come down by at least $50, $55 in both Europe and India. So to some extent, the drop in prices will get offset by the drop in coking coal costs. There are other costs that we are looking at to see how can we try and protect the margins.
So to that extent, what kind of EBITDA per ton are you expecting for your consolidated operations and your India operations? If you can give some color on that for the second quarter and maybe for the fiscal?
No, I mean, normally we don't give a specific guidance on EBITDA forward looking. We just give you a guidance on the NRs and coal prices because there are many other moving parts. But that between these two, you can roughly get a sense of where we are. But certainly, we expect H2 to be much stronger than H1 for multiple reasons. We expect that China will take some actions, and even otherwise, Chinese exports will reduce in H2 than we've seen in H1, which will bring more stability to international steel prices. The India demand post-monsoons should be strong leading up to the elections. Europe will progressively start getting better. Inflation is slowly coming under control globally. Interest rates hikes will stop. So overall, we expect better H2 than H1 for sure.
Fair enough. Mr. Narendran, you did briefly mention the UK operations. I mean, we have seen the EBITDA there fluctuate quite a bit. You have been in talks with the UK government for a long time now, and you know, there are phases where we hear that things are moving ahead, and you know, I understand that it must be keeping you very busy. Help me understand, there are some reports that you are internally looking also at a plan for exit. I mean, this is something that you have considered earlier as well. So help me understand, where do we stand vis-a-vis the conversations that are happening, because they are happening at the very top level. So what's happening on that front, and if you are actually looking at an exit option, what could these possibly be?
Yeah, so let's put it this way. The conversations have been going on for some time, as you said, but we must also consider the fact that we've had three governments in UK in the last 2 years. So there's not been the political stability that is required to take some of these calls. But we are seeing now a clear progress. Dedicated teams are working on it with us, and there are a lot of conversations going on. So we want to take it to its logical conclusion. We are hopeful that we'll find a solution which is acceptable to all stakeholders. All other speculation is very hypothetical, and just now we are focused on trying to find a solution which is workable for all stakeholders.
Is there a timeline you are looking at? Is there a hard stop that you want to put internally? Because this has been going on for a long time.
So one timeline we have already said publicly is that many of the heavy end assets in the UK are coming to the end of life. So obviously, as they come towards the end of life, we have no option but to then close them, because you can't run them if they are not safe, right? So we had guided that we pretty much have just about a year to take some calls on that. So that's kind of a timeline which is there. Beyond that, of course, I think you know we are hoping that in the next few months we will come to some sort of conclusion. But the outside timeline is what you said, the end of life of the assets, which is certainly going to start happening within a year.
From your conversation and from what I see in your presentation and press release, you're clearly looking at India as a bright spot. I mean, your capex continues, and you are saying that it will be driven by the India demand. What makes you so bullish about India?
Traditionally, India has had consumption-led growth. Over the last few years, we're seeing it more being an investment-led growth. That's good for steel because the steel intensity of growth is higher when it's investment-led growth. Uh, you know, most developing countries have a steel consumption growth rate which is higher than the GDP growth rate. Even when China was growing at a GDP growth rate of 10%, steel consumption was growing at 15%. In India, it's been the other way around. The steel consumption has grown slower than the GDP growth rate. That's changing. So now you're seeing GDP growth rate, or rather steel consumption, growing at a faster rate than GDP growth rate, as it should be. And that gives us the confidence that the demand in India will continue to be strong. Prices will vary with international prices, but we are one of the lowest cost producers of steel in the world. Even if you see last quarter, the EBITDA margin in the India business is over 20%, right? And this is when steel prices are quite low, and overall most steel companies are not doing so great. So I think we have the confidence that we are in a good cost position. We have the confidence that the demand in India will grow, and we have a very strong franchise in the marketplace with our retail business, our brands, our relationship with the OEMs, a dominant, a strong position in auto and other high-end sectors. So that's why we want to keep growing in India, and that helps the overall Tata Steel balance sheet and the overall Tata Steel portfolio.
What about the capex? You did announce a 16,000 crore capex earlier in this year. Are we on track for that? And in terms of financing it, how is that going?
Absolutely, we are on track. If you see the first quarter itself, we spent about 4,000. So we are pretty much on track. Most of it will go towards completing the Kalinganagar project and the associated work. We have obviously the internal cash flows to support that. We are also focused on our debt. We've said that every year we want to reduce the debt by $1 billion. Ever since we said it, apart from last year, every year we've done it. This year, of course, the first 2 quarters have been more challenging than we thought, but still we've not given up on that target. And I think we can manage a good balance between deleveraging and growth because of the strong cash flows out of India.
So we are still maintaining the debt reduction target of 1 billion for FY24.
Too early to give up.
All right, that's fair enough. Mr. Narendran, you spoke about being bullish on India and the opportunities here. The brownfield expansion that you're looking at will continue, of course. But are you looking at anything in the secondary market? Because NMDC has just opened their data center. I mean, you have said earlier that you were not very keen to look at it. But between that and there are some opportunities rising out of Vedanta as well. Are you keen to look at that space?
At the moment, we are focused on our organic growth because what we've done over the last few years is more of inorganic growth, but that has given us sites on which to work on. So between the Kalinganagar site, which was anyway ours, the Neelachal site, which we acquired, the Bhushan site, which we acquired, we can actually build about 40 to 50 million tons in these sites, including Jamshedpur. So we have enough runway available to realize our ambitions on our growth. We've said 40 million by 2030. It's more about execution than anything else. So we don't really need to look at any inorganic growth opportunities. So we'll stay focused on that. But we'll obviously keep an eye out for them. But like I said, it's not as essential as it was a few years back.
Mr. Narendran, help me understand the strong theme playing out in your sector and in most energy intensive sectors is the decarbonization story, and that is something that steel makers like Tata Steel have put on priority. But this is happening at a time when the macroeconomic situation is not really very comforting, and there are challenges in the commodity cycle as well. How tough is it getting to be on track with your decarbonization plan, and what are you doing to kind of expedite the process, especially given that the carbon taxes are really going to kick in soon?
So, the transition needs three stakeholders to play their role. One is the industry itself, like us. So we need to plan for it, plan some capex for it, plan the transition. But this transition cannot be done by just the industry. So you need the regulatory environment to support that. So if I take Europe as an example, which is in some sense ahead of the rest of the world on the regulatory environment, there is a policy framework, including the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is to encourage local steel companies to transition into a greener future. There's a carbon tax which you pay, and the carbon border adjustment mechanism says that anybody who's selling steel in Europe has to pay the same carbon tax. So you have a framework for that. Then you need to have customers who are willing to pay a premium, because green steel means you need to pay a premium for that green steel. So in Europe, that's also happening. So any geography which wants to transition needs the industry to commit and do what it has to do, the government to create that framework and the environment, and customers willing to pay more. I think so that's there. I think in Europe, hence the plans are being made, both in Netherlands and in UK, using all these elements or ingredients. In India, I think we're moving in that direction. A lot more needs to be done on a policy basis. We need to also have customers willing to pay more for green steel. I can hear some customers talking about it. And as industry, we need to invest in it, which we are already doing. So, and there's no silver bullet. There'll be multiple solutions that we need to develop and scale up. And it's going to be a very exciting phase, going to create a lot of opportunities. It's also going to create a lot of demand for steel, because all new energy sources also have steel in some form or the other involved in generating or transmission or storage of energy.
Mr. Narendran, fair enough, and you are juggling too many balls right now. And the final question I have for you is that, as your tenure is renewed another 5 years, what is the one thing on your mind that you want to be the #1 target for the next 5 years for you as the head of Tata Steel?
Execution, both in execution of transformation in Europe and execution of growth in India.
Fair enough. Best of luck for that, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Rashid.